Hi guys, Voodoo Host here. You're probably wondering like why the microphone sounds a bit different. I'm not using the Yeti microphone today because I couldn't pack it into my laptop case. Working an overnight shift, so I have to mute the microphone every now and then. I got a bit bored watching YouTube videos, so I thought I'd just go into Rome 2. Yeah, I had an Alani campaign going, but it won't go anywhere. So let's just jump into a multiplayer battle and see where it takes us. Oh, did I get kicked already, or am I lagging? Just a bit of lag, that's fine. Let's go to our favorite Masazu, the one faction that will never die. Can I bring 3 of these? Oh, there's the horses off. Well, that was disappointing, but that's okay. Doing an overnight shift right now, so I might sound a bit more tired than I really am, but I guess this would be a good time to just talk about Rome 2, just in general. I don't know if you guys know, but Rome 2 didn't have the best release. I guess the Creative Assembly kind of got rushed to put out an unfinished game. No, they got rushed to bring out the game. The game was unfinished. Sega published it. That's what we got. I think the Creative Assembly knew that it would be unfinished. They had to know anyway. But it doesn't matter. The game has to get published anyway at a certain date. The Creative Assembly has made up for it. And in fact, like they've made up for it over and over again. Even after after other games have come out, they've been paying attention to Rome 2. They're just trying to right the wrongs. And for me, that's definitely worked. I enjoy playing Rome 2 still. It's not like the game's broken anymore. I think like what brought me back to Rome 2 was the fact that it was more like replayable than Attila, because not every faction and culture was copy paste. The only exception to this is of course Athens and Syracuse. Both are like essentially the same, with a few minor differences. I just pick Athens because Syracuse technically has a better roster, but that's what makes Athens more enjoyable. So I guess since we're on the topic of Rome 2, I'll just pick 2 factions and see and say one's best, one's worst. See what you guys think about it. I think the best faction in the game is Rome. Not just because the game is named after the faction, but like their roster is very unique. not diverse at all, but very unique, very melee infantry heavy, melee infantry oriented rather. There's not a huge emphasis on spear infantry once you get into the higher tier melee infantry. In fact, you can literally win a game with no spear infantry with the Romans. This is very uncommon to do with other factions, such as the Etruscan Kingdom. I think the Etruscan Kingdom just lacks that defensive power. Like they're very susceptible to missiles, compared to the Romans who can protect themselves really well from them, but do suffer somewhat from not being able to kill cavalry efficiently. That is to say, like you need to, have them in combat for a long time, and of course that just ties down your units. With the Etruscans, they can do so efficiently. All they have to do is just be in combat, and as long as they survive the charge, they'll be fine. But of course, I'm just rambling. Rome's still the best faction in the game. I think, like, pretty much everything they have just complements their melee infantry, from the dogs to the elephants to the missile cav. Like, they just complement the melee infantry in some way. And that's not something I can easily say with other factions. Sorry, just yawned, so just give me a second. I'm gonna get something to drink. Nothing like a good bottle of Sprite to burn your throat. God, really need that. Last thing I need to do is fall asleep and then a cold blue comes. Anyway, Rome is the best faction, melee infantry oriented. Their units, the other units in other sections complement the melee infantry really well. It's not something you could say with something like, with a faction like, say, the Seleucids. I'll bring them up right now. Where are you? With the Seleucids, they're more of a Hellenic and Eastern, like, hybrid. But they're too diversified, if that makes sense. Like, they just have a lot going for them, but this makes it difficult when you are looking for a straightforward counter. Of course, this complexity does help them a lot. You can't counter shock cav, chariots, and elephants at the same time, assuming that you can micro them all really well. But bringing all of those at the same time means you have to invest less in a core of something. Missile infantry, pikes, swords, it doesn't matter. Like, you just have to bring less of something. I think for me, that's where the Romans kind of, take it for me, because even though they're diversified in their melee infantry, most of the times you're not going to be using anything that's lower than the legionaries, unless you want to really save money. Most of the times people bring legionary cohort, and then of course people bring Evocati cohort because they're technically the most efficient up this way. Armored legionaries are more of a flavor unit. I do bring them when money demands it, or money allows it, rather. But besides that, I don't think I will. I think I went a bit off track when I was talking about the diversification and how the units complement each other, but with the Seleucids, it's pretty straightforward. Yes, the missile infantry can support the swords, but the swords aren't their strong point. Their strong point is the fact that they are a mix of a defensive culture and a culture that's puts an emphasis on high tier shock cav, as well as solid low tier missile units, such as the Persian light archers. I was gonna say that they had Eastern archers, but I just remembered that they don't actually. Persian light archers are like the next best thing anyway, so it doesn't matter. But that's what the culture emphasizes. Bactria is kind of the same thing, but a slightly different way. Like, the game, I think, says that they're trying to be more nomadic, but then that sounds more like Colchis. And then definitely Cimmeria, where Cimmeria is nomadic and Greek. All I'm saying is that they do a better job of it than Colchis or Bactria. So another reason why Rome's so good is because of their cost efficiency with their units. They sacrifice charge for having good staying power, and that really works out well for them because they have solid armor, like, well, technically above average armor in both the base and shield. Of course, it's better to have base armor than it is to have shield armor. It's something you'll find out if you play Age of Charlemagne or Attila in general. But like, when you compare legionaries to thorax swordsmen, legionaries cost 50 talents less, but they'll win in a straightforward fight. The only time thorax swordsmen will win is if they have shield wall, which brings me into my next thing: abilities. The only ability that melee infantry have for Rome is the attacking testudo. For defensive, for the Triarii, they have defensive testudo, which is stationary. It's, I think, less effective at blocking missiles too, but it gives you a bracing bonus. Anyway, besides attacking testudo, they also have loose formation, which I think in the old days was super useful when you were dealing with pikes. But in a melee fight, it puts you at a disadvantage because of the hidden bonus versus infantry. Or actually, they call it bonus versus loose formation in the database files. With other factions, such as the ones that will bring thorax swordsmen, you're essentially paying for the shield wall, which is an ability that boosts your melee defense and armor but limits your speed. You're paying for that, and that price is put into the Thorax Swordsman. That's primarily why, in a straightforward fight, they lose. Attacking Testudo, I believe, has its own price. I've said that before because I compared, I believe, Legionaries to Scutari, even though Scutari have less attack and more defense. I compared the two, but maybe it was Legionaries and something else. Or maybe it was Legionary Cohort and Veteran Shield Warriors, because they cost the same. I can't remember. But in any case, I believe you are paying for attacking Testudo, but it's not like a huge price, because there's no way Legionaries could cost 660 talents, excuse me, and be as effective as they are. 47 attack, 48 defense, like that's hard to come across. It's just like how Hastati are, where they have 35 attack, 48 defense, but then have 60 armor. Like, you're paying for the attacking Testudo. You have to be. There's no way that this is the base price and that attacking Testudo is just a free addition. But if it is, it is. So that's it for Rome. Who would be the worst faction? I don't know if it's either Colchis or the Adristan Kingdom. The Adristan Kingdom works on paper, but when you're in a multiplayer battle, you can see things going against you. For Colchis just lacks something. I think I defined it before, but I don't remember what it was. Like, they're just lacking in general. The roster is quite, like, poor. Like, they're kind of like trying to imitate the Parthians in some way. But they end up falling short. They do have those Greek units that you'd expect. They have the Armenian Kartli Axemen, as well as Axemen. Actually, you know what? No, I said that they imitate the Armenians more because they don't have the other. They don't have shock cav besides the Greek ones, and then they have the Kartli Axemen, and then Halpates, of course. Their only faction-specific unit that I know of is the Colchian Nobles. Like, the roster is really poor. You could easily do this with Bactria, minus the axes, of course. Like, when I say axes, I mean Axemen and Kartli Axemen. Hillmen you can get with Bactria, I'm pretty sure. But in any case, what you can do with Colchis, you could probably do with Bactria. And Bactria could arguably be better in everything except when it comes to using axes to their advantage. Of course, they can counter this with using stronger shock cav, but whatever. That's what makes Colchis like the worst faction in the game. Like I said, the Adristan Kingdom works on paper, but it's when you're playing in multiplayer where they become a problem. I don't know if you guys know, but the Spears used to be mercenaries, and so what used to happen was the Adristan Kingdom suffered. Like, the Adristan Kingdom was on suicide watch essentially before they got them, because all of their Spears were mercenaries. Even to this day, having these guys in your army is just a death wish. They're not good at all. They're efficient for tackling cavalry, but when you're dealing with, say, infantry-based armies, the Adristan Kingdom still suffers because they can't go toe-to-toe in combat with infantry effectively. Like, they can get a lot of kills initially, like the Suebi can, But it's when you start to like have one-on-one engagements that they start to suffer in long term because they don't have the defense or the armor, and they don't have shields. Thracian warriors and Thracian nobles. I was about to say Thracian Wolfswar. They don't have shields that can block missiles. So what ends up happening is you're dealing with slingers that can essentially pelt you from a distance, and then you're gonna fight, and then all of a sudden your men are dropping. You know, it kind of sucks because the Adrissans were like this faction that you're supposed to be afraid of. You know, but when you fight them, you can easily find counters to beat them. I think for me, that's kind of the deal breaker for why the Adrissans are a close contender for the worst faction. Are there any worse factions than the Adrissan Kingdom? I don't know. Like, someone could argue that Epirus is worse than the Adrissan Kingdom, but, like, that's a stretch. That's definitely a stretch. I'm going to bring up Epirus now anyway. Epirus has the pro of having a diversified roster, even though it's mercenaries. In any case, it doesn't matter. It helps diversify their roster. I think their biggest con, I can't remember, but give me 1 second. Sorry about that. So essentially, what happens is their their strength is the fact that they're diversified in different cultures. I think actually it's just Greek and sorry, Hellenic and Latin cultures. So essentially, they're part Greek, part Roman. But their weakness is the fact that they don't have a standard core, kind of like the Adrissans, the Adrissians, or the Swabi. Like, you can't call Samnite warriors a core because they're mercenaries. You know, you can only recruit 3. They struggle offensively because even like relying on, say, Aspis Companion Cav is so rare these days that nobody does it. I've tried. I guess because I don't micro as much as I used to. Like, it doesn't work for me. Like, I've just slowed down, I've noticed over the years when it comes to playing Total War, and I guess when you have high tier melee cav in an infantry dominated game, it kind of backfires. But Aspis Companion cav do see their strengths. Like, it does work for Macedon and their tactics. Epirus can mimic the Macedonians. It's just that the Macedonians are so dangerous on the defensive if you use them right. Whereas Epirus has what it needs to tank, but they're not as strong as offensively as, say, the other Hellenic factions, where because they don't have a standard offensive core. Thorax swordsmen are like they're a defensive sword unit, right? But at the same time, a sword is more offensive than a spear, and so they're more offensive than, say, Thorax hoplites or hoplites in general. Epirus doesn't have that, but the Hellenic factions do. Do all the Hellenic factions have it? Yeah, Egypt has it. I was gonna say, I wonder if Egypt has Thorax swordsman. I think the way you have to be offensive with this faction is a bit different, where you can rely on your missile infantry to win skirmish fights because they have reliable units. I think Agrianian Axemen are underrated, although they have been used quite a bit in people's armies, both Macedonian and Epirot. But I feel that, they're, excuse me, I feel that they're not used as much as they could be because people prefer, say, light peltasts, even though neither Epirus or Macedon have. Pretty sure Macedon doesn't have it, but anyway. So their strength is their diversification and their ability to tank. Their weakness is the fact that they don't have a standard core. At least a reliable one, anyway. Hoplites are somewhat reliable, I'll admit. Like, you could definitely win with any faction that has Hoplites. Just remember, Egypt doesn't have Hoplites, so they do lack that defensive core that could tank bad engagements. Dark swordsmen are effective, but when you're dealing with cav and infantry, you'd want Hoplites for tanking. So there's that. You do have your Therios spears, but I mean, what Hellenic faction doesn't besides, like, Sparta or whatever? I honestly don't know who could be worse than those ones, though. Those factions. Okay, so next, what's the hardest faction to play as? Hardest faction? Carthage, probably. Why? Because Carthage doesn't have one strength or one weakness that would like that you can like that would break the game. Their strength is their diversification. They're arguably like the most diversified faction in the game. Their weakness is they're overly diversified, and so they don't have this one solid strength. Their melee infantry isn't their strength. Their spear infantry isn't their strength. They have one pike unit that is stronger than regular pikes. Missile infantry wise, yeah, they could use some diversification, but again, I think they're overly diversified already. Only one type of shot cav, okay, one type of shot cav is a bit of a problem when you're trying to look for budget shock armies. But it's not like it's the end of the world. Melee cav's diversified. Missile cav, you only have 2 units, one of which is a mercenary. Elephant wise, yeah, they don't have chariots or like low or mid tier shock cav, but they have elephants, and that's something for them. Most of the times, I don't even use elephants now. I just stick with what I am good with. It's kind of like investing, where if you invest in a company that you don't know anything about, or you try to do a call option on a stock that you don't really know its fundamentals, you're gonna have a bad time. I think it's somewhat the same with Carthage. If you're not good with elephants and handling them, you're just gonna deal with somebody one day who's going to use javelins or flaming arrows, and then you're in a real big pickle. Of course, if you know the game, you know there's a bug with horse archers that have flaming arrows. It doesn't work as effectively as it should. Why? I don't know. The only exception are the Amazonians. If you use, say, the Amazonians or the noble women that are available to Royal Scythia, those will work. I don't know why, but I have a feeling it's something to do with how the game was coded and the fact that all 150 ranged units, ranged archers have this ability to make them run amok. Of course, that's not something you deal with if you were using chariots. But again, Carthage doesn't have chariots, so Carthage is overly diversified. But their diversification is what makes them unique to the point where they can defeat pretty much any faction using diversification alone. Not having one single strength does make them hard to understand. But once you understand each and every culture, then you can come back to this faction and say, okay, the barbarians are aggressive and they like to charge and stuff. The Hellenic factions like to hold their ground and push back. And then there's the Roman factions, which are balanced between offense and defense. Then you have the Eastern factions have a heavy emphasis on heavy cavalry, armored, charge-wise, and whatnot. Or it would be like using skirmish cav to, bait and do hit and run tactics or whatnot. So yeah, Carthage would have to be the hardest faction to understand. I think the second hardest would be the Suebi, but the Pergamon could also be up there. Pergamon is just one of those factions that you have to ask yourself, like, how do you play it with how do you play with the deck of cards you've been given? Because Pergamon is supposed to be like a hybrid between Greek and Galatia. And to some extent they are. I will admit though, it's not a really pretty roster. The biggest issue with Pergamon is the fact that they don't have an effective offense. Because even a game of spears are a bit funny. Like Theria spears, yeah, I've used them on the offense numerous times, but you have to use their javelins, right? So they're gonna have to be like micro controlled actually to some point to be effective. Whereas look at Cimmeria, where a lot of their gameplay is macro. Why I say a game of spears are micro is because of their lower range and of course their highest price. Pergamon is just one of those. It's not one of those factions. There's a bunch. Athens is a good example of a faction where, you just have to ask yourself, what are you doing with what you have? Because they're essentially the same as Syracuse with a few mercenary differences. Sorry, just give me 1 second. Sorry about that. So, like, Athens and Syracuse, if you take out their mercenaries, they're the exact same. Why? Like, how do you play with a faction knowing that there's another faction that's essentially the same? Well, you just look at the roster and you realize what their culture is about, and then you try to play it like that. I think just like the Danes in Attila, the Athens and Syracuse are only for like no Athens. Athens is more of just a flavor unit. Yes, they come from um, two different DLCs, but that doesn't that it's not really a good excuse to have a faction that's essentially identical to another faction in a different DLC because they're still part of the same culture. It's just a copy paste. The mercenaries are different. The campaign styles are different too because of the mercenary availability. But once you take over the same types of territories in both campaigns, they become the exact same. The only differences are their cultural traits. Oh, sorry, their campaign traits altogether, and the fact that you can get one type of mercenary in multiplayer that another can't, and then they can get another type of mercenary. Oh, that's a good bottle of Sprite. But anyway, back to what I was saying before. I think a hard faction is a faction that you can't just look at and say, okay, I get it. Like an easy faction with the recent release of the Desert Kingdoms for Rome 2 would be Kush. Let's just quickly look at them. You look at them, oh, they have a lot of melee infantry. Seems like a melee infantry focused faction. But then you see that they have 4 types of bows. Instantly, when I saw this, I'm like, okay, they're a bow faction where they use their bows for offense and defense, just like any other faction. Then they use their melee infantry to close the gap. And I mean, I was right because, like, they're very good at what they do. Kushite archers, Royal Kushite archers, both pretty good, although I do believe Royal Kushite archers are overpriced. In any case, Kush is just an archer faction. Now, look at Miss Aisley. Miss Aisley is straightforward. They have legionaries and cohorts. They also have, excuse me, they also have good spears, but they don't have any bows. They have 1 slinger unit and 3 skirmishers. Their strength is their missile cav, especially the high tier one, and the fact that they assimilate Roman culture. The biggest issue with this roster is that you have two sections, I'll say, 2 parts of the roster that don't synergize well. Missile cav and melee infantry. They don't synergize well. Missile cav can essentially kite melee infantry for days. You know, when it comes to spear infantry, it's the same thing. But then with spear infantry, most of the time, you'll, especially when you're dealing with like Thuriel spears or whatnot, they have something to counter Jav Cav with. With melee infantry, it usually is a specialist, like say the Iceni's ambushers or even the Missaisley's their tribesmen. They have ways to counter Jav Cav. However, they can't like say counter bow Cav. So when you look at this roster and you see that their strengths are in those 2 sections, there has to be some way that you can have them to synergize. And you can. It's just very difficult. And it's very specific. You could use the hammer and anvil approach where your melee infantry, which are already strong, can engage other melee infantry. And then you can have your Jav Cav come up behind and just shoot javelins. The biggest problem with the biggest problem with this strategy, however, is the fact that javelins are better against cavalry. So what happens is javelins do a ton of armor piercing, no doubt about it. They also have a faster fire rate than bows do, on average. A low tier javelin unit will still have close to the same as a a a bow. So with Javcav do have more armor piercing. They have, when it comes to low tier javelin units, they'll have the same rate of fire as a high tier bow unit. Now, you can see that however way you want. Javelins, on average will have a better DPS because of the fact that they have a higher armor piercing value. Sorry, just give me 1 second. The fact of the matter is, the reason why javelins are not like preferred over bows is just because they have less ammo. One, two, they have less range, and then the third reason is because it's possible for bows to do more damage as they have a higher base damage already. The highest damage a javelin can do is 41, while the highest a bow can do is 40. And that, of course, can vary with ammo types. Heavy shot and normal shot will always do the same damage, but heavy shot, I think, doubles. Yeah, I think it doubles the AP value. But I mean, usually bows bows have the same type of ammo anyway. Like with javelins, it's kind of the same thing. It's just when it comes to flaming shot, that's the only difference. Anyway, what was I gonna say? It's very difficult to use javelins, javcav, and then use melee infantry when your melee infantry are already strong enough to deal with most other melee infantry. I'm saying this because their javcav are expensive. Their melee infantry, the good ones anyway, are also kind of expensive. For example, Desert Legionaries have the same stats as regular Legionaries. The only difference is that they're immune to heat. That immune to heat costs them 40 talents, and so they cost the same as Legionary cohort, even though they're not even as effective, just because of the differences in armor. Sorry about that. Again, it's very difficult to synergize missile cav and melee infantry, but it is possible. There are different ways, thanks to the fact that we've had factions such as Galatia, who has a strong base core, but also has Javcav, or say Tylus. But you also have factions that don't have like the same strength in their melee infantry, such as Cimmeria, but they can still like synergize. It's possible. It's just very difficult to do. It's a lot different than say using Rome to synergize. Synergize units. Synergize your missile infantry with your melee infantry. And the reason they can do it is because they don't have the same options, like, say, high tier Javcav. Because if the Romans had high tier Javcav, how would they use it with an already somewhat overpowered melee infantry base? There are ways. Like I said before, you can use the hammering anvil approach. You can, but I personally prefer using javelins when dealing with elephants and cavalry. You get that bonus versus large that you wouldn't get for infantry. And I think heavy shot was supposed to have a bonus versus infantry, but I don't think it does. It does in Attila for sure, but not so much in Rome 2. Trying not my best not to sleep, but man, it's so difficult. Had a good sleep too. It's so weird. That's okay. I still have 2.5 hours on my shift. Feels like it's gone by so fast though. Anyway, I'm going off track. I don't know if I'll play a game today. I've been trying to watch videos on picking dividend stocks. I've had my investment books online for over a year. I also bought Stock Investing for Canadians for Dummies and The Intelligent Investor by Benjamin Graham. Speaking of which, if you ever get The Intelligent Investor, it's more of an advanced book. I don't know if I'd recommend it for a beginner. Anyway, going back to Rome 2, I think it's pretty straightforward to see why factions are, very difficult to understand. If a faction is very difficult to understand, chances are, that other people won't be playing them. I think it's the same thing when it comes to a faction that works in very specific cases. Sorry about that again. A lot of things are happening in the hospital. Anyway, man, am I tired. Anyway, going back to the game for a minute, I might get another call in like a few seconds. The hardest factions to play still, like I said, the hardest faction to play is probably Carthage, but I did kind of omit the nomads for some reason. The nomads are like all cavalry in an infantry dominated game, and yet people are like tempted to spam missile cav. Like bringing all bow cav is such a bad idea because it defeats the purpose of the nomads. Yeah, their strength is missile cav, but at the same time, it's not fair to. Well, I guess it's not that it's not fair. It's not a good way to put it because people don't care. But I think missile cav can be countered if you're not going to use them right. For reference, I just use the AI whenever I can't bother microing bow cav. With horse skirmishers, it's a bit more tricky. I mean, with bull cav, it does get very problematic when you're dealing with infantry. because they'll switch to heavy shot, and heavy shot in Rome 2 still has a range penalty. That wasn't changed. Anyways, that's pretty much it. I was gonna play a game, but I'm too tired. I'm just too tired. Anyway, guys, thanks so much for watching. I hope this helps someone make a decision for whether or not they want to buy DLCs, even though I never mentioned that. But yeah, like, again, thanks guys so much for watching. If this were in a late night stream, I'd be making better content, I promise. But it is what it is. So thank you one more time, and I'll see you guys later. Bye, guys.